Goes. And it is 5 o'clock. Oh, and Richard's with us. Thank you, Richard, for coming. Richard, I got your message, by the way. I'll call you tomorrow. It's been quite a day. And Elliot, I never wrote you back, but thank you very much for your compliment on Williamsburg. I've never had anybody say that is the Rembrandt of tours, and I was flying high on that all weekend. So most appreciative of that compliment. I'm glad Williamsburg went well. Morbo, good to see you from Rutledge, PA. You guys are you're tried and true troopers. We have 22 signups tonight. We've run this tour twice before through the pandemic, and we decided as part of trying to cultivate new insiders for the holiday season, we would put some of the best sellers back on. But you know, most of you who are on this, I could talk about this all day long. And I am going to get started. I know we'll probably have some more people streaming in, but for those of you who maybe this is your first time, and Jane, hi Jane. I believe, Jane, you are up in the snowy Berkshires as well, I think, right? Oh, well, thank you, Jeffrey. And always good to see you too, Jane. So I'm just going to get started. So here we are back at how it all started for me, Penn Station. I'm sure you've probably heard the story before, but I'll just retell it since I don't go into it in too much detail, but you guys all know Michelle very well too. When I wrote The Eternal Space back in 2014 and I was fundraising for it, I sent a Twitter message to Michelle. I was a big Untapped fan at the time, but I wasn't working with them, and said, I wrote a play about Penn Station, want to do a tour. And I pretty much thought they'd never reach out. They'd probably go, oh, who is this quack who's doing a tour about Penn Station? And Michelle immediately reached out, and we started what we thought would be maybe 1 or 2 tours walking around Penn, which to this day, I think we've counted about 5 to 6,000 people we have taken through Penn. And as my New Jersey mother says, I can't believe people pay you to take them through that beep hole. You can fill in the blanks with that one. But let's start. So this is a picture I've used before, and obviously this is Penn in all its grandeur, just about finished in 1910. You'll notice that pit of sand. In the foreground here, that's going to become the Hotel Pennsylvania, which is across the street. A couple of new pieces of intel for those of you who have joined me before. I did go down to Penn. I spent about an hour or so down there. I was being recorded for a podcast called Fine Arts in New York, and the host wanted to talk to me about the Penn Remnants, and I hadn't been down to Penn for a while. It's interesting, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but let's get started. Oh, I'm in Keynote, so I forgot we got to click the screen. So as a lot of you know, I designed this talk way back in the day, although now it's changed very much so, for the National Art Club, who actually brought me in to do 2 talks. One was about the old Penn completely, and then the next one was about new Moynihan Penn Empire Gateway. And so I had put those 2 together for Untapped, and I called it the Once and Future Penn, which of course is after the King Arthur legend, The Once and Future King, which is one of my favorite books as a kid growing up. And one of the new things I had started with was this. This is a new piece of art in the 123 passageway leading to Penn, and it is by a really talented artist, really beautiful glass mosaic, and her name is Diana El Hadid. And she calls this Gradiva, and that's because this is a depiction of an ancient Greek, and then there were many actually ancient Roman copies of this sculpture called Gradiva, and that translates roughly into she who walks, and that was modeled after Gradivus Mars, who was he who walks into war, or the god of war walking into war. And in the late 19th century, Wilhelm Jensen, a German author, wrote a book about an artist falling in love with the image of Gradiva and actually conjuring her up in the ruins of Pompeii. Sigmund Freud did a very famous analysis of this, and actually his analysis of Gradiva is in the Sigmund Freud Museum. And the reason why I think this is a really great place to start, especially now that we're in a virtual tour, I don't think I could start in a real Penn tour here because it's a very slim passageway, is what you see in the center of this mosaic is the actual manifestation of Grotova. This is her arm, and it's all that we can see that's real. And actually, this is the Grotova, one of the Grotova statues. And it's believed that there were one of three. It was a triptych because it was characterizing the Sisters of the Morning Dew. And if you go back, you'll see that the rest of her is sort of an abstraction, sort of smattered against memory here. And I know I'm getting a little deep here, but the reason why this appeals to me is because much like the artist in Jensen's novel, I sort of fell in love with Penn Station and constantly try to conjure up that image of her, not in the ruins of Pompeii, but in the ruins of Penn, actually, on the spot. And I believe a lot of people do that as well. Penn Station becomes an obsession for historians and architects and preservationists because of the way that we lose Penn. And so this is a really great way to sort of start what you're about to see, which is sort of the dissemination of my obsession with this. And it's a really stunning piece of work too. If you're in Penn, it's worth going down to what used to be a real hellhole for the 123 in the back corner by the LIRR. And this hallway has been made much better by new lighting and that Diana Al Hadid piece. But what you're looking at here is an aerial photo of the Penn Station campus from 1941. And it was, I bought this photo actually off of a photographer by the name of Ron Zeal. And Ron Zeal was a great guy. He passed away a couple of years ago. He was an avid railroad photographer. He actually snuck behind the Berlin Wall to get pictures of communist rail in East Berlin. He told me a really great story. I'm peppering this now with new stories to keep you guys wrapped. So he actually told me a story of he was captured by the East Germans and sort of asked what he was doing. And when they took out his canister of film without opening it, he said, "That's my diabetic medication." He was diabetic all his life. And they believed him, and he got his film out, and he got a lot of his pictures of communist rail. But he also, being a Long Islander and growing up in Long Island, was obsessed with Penn Station. And he had a lot of great photos of Penn like this one. And this sort of shows the enormity of Penn Station, how it stretched from 31st Street to 33rd Street, and then from 7th to 8th Avenues. But the reason why I'm showing this is I'm going to tease up a little bit of the new Moynihan. When Governor Cuomo started putting out his renderings for the new Moynihan complex, you could see there was a definite homage to this photo right here. Not only with the sort of space and size that they were trying to convey this new train hall was going to take up, but also with the aesthetic of the nighttime lighting there. And yes, that is Moynihan. It is a rendering. It's not real. These renderings were put out as early as 4.5 years ago. But one of the things I've noticed as they're completing Moynihan as we speak, because it is supposed to open in a couple of weeks, they have stayed pretty true to the renderings. Everything that you see in the renderings, it looks like you're going to get. And I am going to do this talk again in January for new insiders, but I will put on quite a lot of new Moynihan shots because I am going to go the day it opens. And of course, the quote from Cuomo when he released all of these renderings was, 50 years after the loss of the original Penn structure, passengers will once again experience a world-class rail hub worthy of New York. With access to trains and subway and state-of-the-art infrastructure, the Moynihan Train Hall seamlessly joins history, architecture, design, and function. Okay, as you can see from this rendering, and those of you who have visited the Hudson Yards, which I think are a number of you now on this talk, you'll notice that, of course, the balance between the public space, the train concourse section is now offset by a lot of retail and a lot of dining, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And of course, the question always sort of enters into your head now, well, is there a need for it? You know, will the market bear it? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But recently, I believe it was now March of 2019, a book came out by Paul M. Kaplan, New York's original Penn Station. the rise and fall of a tragic American landmark. And Paul reached out to me during the process of writing this book, and we had lunch a couple of times. We had a couple of phone calls, and I did not realize that he was actually going to be physically inserting huge chunks of quotes that I had said during our conversations. And this was one of them. So, and I remember when I read the book, it was, a big offset quote in the back of the book. And I remember reading it and going, wow, this guy makes a lot of sense. I wonder who it is. I wonder who it is. It didn't have a name under it. And then I realized it was me. And I know I've read this before, but he asked what my views were on Moynihan. And I said, I think it's a fitting tribute to Senator Moynihan, who lobbied so hard for the redevelopment of Penn Station. I also think it's a wonderful historical coda to use a McKim Mead and White building to offer a more appropriate national gateway into New York City. There's a but, of course. I worry that the current design will look dated quickly. And I also worry about the idea that it'll just become another subterranean mall surrounding train tracks. But I'm optimistic that the sheer size of it will impress. And the pressing question I have is what happens to Penn Station across the street? We will still need to redevelop and reinvigorate Penn, not only for LIRR and New Jersey Transit riders, but for the hundreds of thousands of commuters who pass through Penn on a daily basis. Now, I said that 2 years ago, and I wouldn't change one word of it today. Nothing of which I said 2 years ago, I think has changed yet. So there it is. And of course, it was me who said it. And I'm your presenter. So that lands a little bit better when you're in person speaking to a room of people, but there I am. This was actually very early days when I was doing MAS Jane's walks. We had already launched the Remnants of Penn tour for Untapped, but I was doing it about once a month at that point, and that was the only tour. I was not full-time back then. And Jane's Walk was a massive success. I did 3 of them, and each time 40 to 50 people came to go on the tour. And I was, absolutely amazed. I was standing right outside of the Eagle on 7th Avenue thinking, is anybody going to show up, or am I going to get 3 people? And every time I did something with Penn, even still to this very night, I'm still shocked at the number of people who come to listen, but there I am. And this all started, as a lot of you already know, with a picture on the Amtrak concourse right outside of the men's room, which is this black and white photo where my cursor is right now. And that was a 1910 shot of the former concourse of where we would have roughly been standing. I was a young college freshman, Fordham University, came down to Penn for the first time. And I was waiting for a friend coming in from Trenton. She was lost. I was lost. I looked at that, despondent, and I said, oh, that's beautiful. It must be Europe. I had no idea the history of Penn at that point. And I saw that tiny little sign right there that said, New York, Penn Station, 1910, and shouted out audibly at the top of my lungs, bullshit. And people turned to look at me. It was like 11 o'clock at night in Penn. So, and that was it. I was hooked. I was like, all right, I need to know more. And the writer in me wanted to turn it into a project. So it became a play. That was 13,938 words. Thank you, word count on Word. And that was the beginning of the end for me. And this was the end product. A couple of years ago in 2015, we had an off-Broadway run, which was, I dare say, successful at Theater Row. And it was called The Eternal Space. It was a 2-man show about a construction worker and photographer taking down Penn Station while a former Xavier English professor, or teacher, was trying to keep it up. He was part of Ag Bani trying to save it. And then, of course, these two meet over 3 years of Penn's demolition and become very friendly, even though they are on opposite sides of the opinion that Penn should live or die. And this is another shot of me doing a Jane's Walk tour. And of course, I think everybody, including myself, thought the play would probably last a lot longer than the tours did. And of course, the tours have lasted 10 times longer than the play has, mainly because I haven't had time to restage it. I've gotten lots of letters and lots of requests someday to redo Penn. And of course, now with Moynihan opening, it would have been the time, but the pandemic is not a ripe time for theater at the moment. So maybe again. But let's do a little history. Of course, the station in stone is modeled after the sword in the stone. And this is the idea that, yes, this was a very massive, oh, hush, Siri. Sorry about that. An impressive structure. You could see this is from the 7th Avenue and 31st Street perspective as they are building the facade of Penn. And the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, that is Alexander Cassatt. Yes, he is brother of Mary Cassatt, the painter, who was living in Paris at the time. That's going to become important. He had a big problem. He was leading the nation's most successful business at the time. Actually, was the first business to reach the $1 billion profit mark. And he had a direct competitor, which was the New York Central. And of course, the New York Central had in 42nd Street its own direct way into Manhattan, and Alexander Cassatt's Pennsylvania Railroad did not. He had to terminate his passengers here at Exchange Place in Jersey City, which was a gigantic train shed and ferry terminus. And people would board the ferry. You see there is a ferry right where my cursor is, right there at the bottom of the screen. And those ferries would bring people to 3 points in Manhattan. Lower Manhattan, Cortlandt Street, which we now know roughly as the Penn Station, at World Trade Center, and then somewhere around the 14th Street area, and then 33rd Street. So he had decided, enough of this. I need to get my riders directly into Manhattan. This is ridiculous. This is actually the train shed of Exchange Place. And a lot of people, Exchange Place was a fascinating structure within itself. And actually, it is demolished the same year they begin to demolish Penn Station. 1963 is when they begin to wipe that off the map. But these were some of the old Pennsylvania Railroad ferry depots where people were coming in, getting off these boats, and then having to trudge their way into the center of the island of Manhattan. Not a great scene, especially, again, even though Grand Central was considered a little out of the way on 42nd Street in the East Side, at least it was in Manhattan. And at least you could hook up to a lot of other options to get around Manhattan once you got there. It was rough going on the west side of Manhattan. Here is a rendering of, or a sketch of Cortlandt Street, people commuting back and forth. And of course, as you can see, it's crowded. And although we are enjoying commuting by boat, especially now in the pandemic, and it's also a lot of fun, I'm assuming on a daily basis, it can wear at you. And Alexander Cassatt teams up with this gentleman who's Samuel Ray. Samuel Ray is sort of like the William Wilgus of this project, for those of you who know who William Wilgus is, who was the chief engineer of the New York Central, who designed Grand Central Terminal. He is the man who is responsible for creating not only the design of the concourse, but he's really the engineer behind all of this, even though he is the vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, working closely with Cassatt. And he is also the man who envisions, much like Wilgus, this idea of a neighborhood within a neighborhood around Penn Station at the time. And who do they bring on? Well, they were the Starchitects of the time, very, very popular, even in public standards. This is McKim, Mead, and White, all of whom sitting around, obviously a very posed photo, looking at blueprints. But these guys were, again, the forefront of the city beautiful movement, which had taken over New York by storm with the Beaux-Arts style of architecture, made famous in the Chicago Exposition. And they were building all of these public palaces or public temples all over New York. The one that we still have today, which I get to show quite a bit during tours, is the Manhattan Municipal Building downtown, which is still a magnificent structure. And of course, a lot of McKim, Mead, and Whites are no longer with us. But the process, and I'll bullet point it because this could be a whole other talk, was Alexander Cassatt, Samuel Ray, McKim, Mead, and White, they all go to Europe for a couple of months. They go visit Mary in Paris, and they see the d'Orsay. And of course, the d'Orsay is bringing electric trains underground into Paris. And that's a really great idea because guess what, guys? We need to electrify the trains coming into Manhattan by 1909. So they're learning how to electrify their trains and bring them into Manhattan directly, which gives them the great idea of, we're not going to build a bridge over the Hudson, which they tried to pose, but it didn't work out. They're going to build a tunnel under the Hudson, and not only under the Hudson, straight through Manhattan out to Long Island. And to do that, they needed to partner with the Long Island Railroad. So for those of you who know the Long Island Railroad well, the Long Island Railroad concourse has been exactly where it has been since 1910. They are one of the original and only surviving tenants of Penn. And these were the two tunnels that they built. massively impressive engineering project for the time. And unfortunately, which I will talk about soon, they're still the only two tunnels that we have, and they opened in 1910. Not a good scene when you lose one of them. Not a good idea when they are servicing most of the south and west of the country by rail to get into New York. Eesh. Dangerous. But again, this was a huge feat of engineering. And then, of course, the result was the crown jewel train station of its time. McKim, Mead, and White brought these illusions that they saw from Europe, their European trip, the Roman baths of Caracalla, which are going to be represented in the center waiting room, and the Brandenburg Gates, which are going to be represented on the 7th Avenue facade. There is also 3 other facades. There's a 31st and 33rd facade and an 8th Avenue facade. None as grand as this colonnade here on 7th Avenue, which McKim, Mead, and White deliberately designed as the main entryway. They wanted you to come in from 7th Avenue. And here is that Roman bath of Caracalla, 168 foot ceiling, sorry. To put that into perspective, when you are in Grand Central Terminal on the main concourse floor looking up at the mural, you're looking 120 feet in the air. So kind of imagine another almost 50 feet above your head. And of course, here it is. And this is the photo that sort of makes us all kind of get Groteva-like weepy about what Penn Station was. There are a lot of, could also be a separate talk, a lot of issues with Penn, even as it opened in 1910, which actually makes the design of Grand Central Terminal, which we still have today, slightly superior to Pennsylvania Station. And I almost feel bad saying that, but of course I do tours of Grand Central too. Here's another view. Of course, the things that we're seeing are the grandeur, the space, the light, the height of the ceilings, the absolute impressive nature of the architecture as it welcomes you into New York. And of course, at this time, it's welcoming in the whole country into New York. And we all know, or most of us know, and if you don't, you're going to get treated to it very soon, what Pennsylvania Station looks like today. And it's not anywhere near this. You're also going to see the statue right here. That statue is an Adolf Weinman. Adolf Weinman was the sculptor of choice for McKim, Mead, and White, and he did both Alexander Cassatt and Samuel Ray. This is the Alexander Cassatt statue. Directly across the staircase from the perspective that we are looking from is the statue of Samuel Ray, which until last year was on the campus of Penn, which I'll show you a picture of. In a second. It has been removed by Vernato. And of course, this Beaux-Arts illusion, Roman baths of Caracalla, bleeds out into this train shed, which was at the time sort of an extremely modern look at a European train shed, very large. These ceilings were about 150 feet in the air, maybe it's slightly lower at points, but there are a lot of photos, and some of them you'll see tonight, where people are standing on this floor, which will also become important in a little bit, and it looks like they're standing out in the middle of the day outside. And of course, that was the idea, to make people feel like it was open and airy. And of course, the daylight was doing the work of electricity as well to save on the electricity bills. Now, Samuel Ray, again, wanted to develop the entire neighborhood because they bought up land in what was known as the Tenderloin district of Manhattan, which was this West Side area that, Penn is today. And it was a lot of gambling, prostitution, saloons, bars. It was a depressed area. And Samuel Ray got the idea, again, much like William Wilgus over on the east side of Manhattan for Grand Central, let's buy all this land up, let's carve it up, and let's start charging air rights. Let's get McKim, Mead, and White to design other component buildings, like what you're seeing here in this postcard for the Hotel Pennsylvania, which was also influenced by McKim, Mead, and White, and connected to Penn Station. Again, much like the Biltmore Hotel to Grand Central Terminal. And then the post office on the other side of the building, which is going to come in handy in a couple weeks. So here is that Adolf Weinman statue of Samuel Ray. It was right outside the Vernato offices of 2 Penn, right as you're going down the walkway towards the entrance of Madison Square Garden. It had lived there for years and years, and you can see it's Samuel Ray. And I like, whereas Alexander Cassatt's statue is a little bit more stately, Samuel Ray looks like he's a guy going to work. You know, he looks like a worker. He's holding his hat. He's got his coat draped over his arm, and he's got the plans to the station in his hand and a model of the station on the other side of him, which you can kind of almost see here. And that idea was that, you know, he's the grit. He's sort of the guy who is doing the work. He's also the guy who's going to take over when Alexander Cassatt will die before the station opens. A lot of people blame, also like Charles McKim, who also died before the station opened, the stress of building the station for the untimely deaths of both of those men. Samuel Ray will live on to see it succeed and to also develop the entire neighborhood. But here's a quote from Hilary Ballin, who wrote a really great book in the early 2000s called New York's Pennsylvania Stations. She said, "Penn did not make you feel comfortable. It made you feel important." And that was one of the big things about Penn that it got critiqued for. Mainly, you'd get up into the Roman Baths of Caracalla, that main waiting room, and it was so big, you did feel important, but it was not on a human scale. Also, you had to climb your way up from the tracks. You had to go up a set of stairs, then go up another set of stairs, and then up another set of stairs to get to street level. You felt like you were sort of slogging your way out of Penn, whereas, again, for those of you who know Grand Central or have been on the tour, you know William Wilgus designed those really elegant ramps, and you could go from track level up a little set of stairs and out to the street without ever having to travel a set of stairs again. And Grand Central is a little bit more on a scale of humanity, even though it's beautiful, whereas Penn was almost like, you know, Mount Olympus for the gods. And of course, we transition into The Candle in the Wind, which of course is the demolition of Penn and the beginning of, again, like I said, the obsession of, well, what happened to Penn? Why did it happen this way? And of course, we held up Penn as one of the great tragedies of our time for architecture and history. And that actually is a photo from Aaron Rose. Aaron Rose was a photographer and friend of Norman McGrath, who a lot of his photos you will see very soon. Aaron Rose was a ward of the city. He was an orphan and a good friend of Norman's, and they would go photograph Penn together on the weekends. And, you know, Norman said, I could just pull up over the tarps, go in, go climbing on the girders. Nobody cared. Nobody stopped me. And if they saw me, nobody said anything. Very different. No OSHA back then also. And at least I don't think so. And he was so depressed by the demolition of Penn that he rolled the film up. He threw it in a freezer. And he said, I'm going to forget about these. And he forgot about them until the 90s when Hilary Ballin, whose quote you just heard, contacted Norman McGrath to do a photo essay in her book. And Norman called up Aaron and said, guys, Aaron, people are interested in this again, develop them. He develops them. They have that really ghostly hue. He develops them quickly and donates the entire collection to the Museum of the City of New York. And he is a very, very generous individual because he wrote a letter to them saying that I could do whatever I wanted with the photos. Don't give him any trouble. And I was like, oh, thank you, Aaron. This is the facade of 7th Avenue in the, I think it's about 1964. So what you can see is the neglect of Penn makes it sort of this honking mass or a relic that people did not readily all that care about on the public view. Of course, when it's announced that Penn is demolished, there is an outcry from architects and historians and people who care about city architecture. But the general public wasn't all that convinced in the beginning that getting rid of this building isn't so much of a bad idea, mainly because it was hot as hell in there. And so here's what the concourse looks like in the early 60s. And you can see now the windows are open, high glass ceilings. The glass now has become sort of frosted over from painting, blacking out during the war, and, you know, just general residue of pollution. And it's hot in there. It's hot as hell. They tried to mount fans over the staircases leading up from the tracks, but, you know, you talk to people about Penn and they remember, A, yes, beautiful, B, dirty and hot in the late 50s and 60s. And I always say this to the tour, if you really want to get a sense of that, watch the first 4 minutes of The 7 Year Itch, and you'll see It's the gentleman who ends up getting obsessed with Marilyn Monroe is leading his family out to Maine by train for the summer, and it's in Penn, and they're sweating to death, and it's gross. And of course, the walls are dirty. And this scene, actually, this is an actual photograph. This was a recreation for the recent film Motherless Brooklyn, which was written, produced, and starring Edward Norton, who was did the whole film on a shoestring budget. And his production team said, don't film that scene that's supposed to be in Penn. It's going to be too expensive. Just change it to Grand Central Terminal. At least we can use Grand Central and it'll be cheap. And he said, absolutely not. We're going to do Penn and we're going to recreate it. And what they did is they, in a sound stage, they created the floor level and then everything else was done digitally. And they did a very good job. We talked to the production team about it. And there he is walking past a scene that was seen quite a bit in Penn, which is a sweetheart giving her soldier a kiss. And of course, here are the Agbani, the Action Group for Better Architecture in New York, who came together very quickly to protest the announcement of the demolition of Penn. And again, it was, save our heritage, save Penn Station. Don't demolish it, polish it was a big one that they put out there. They got Jane Jacobs to come. The New York Times was there covering it because the Times, Ada Louise Huxtable disagreed. And a lot of people got a lot of famous quotes out of this, including Ada Louise Huxtable and Vincent Scully. But it was a very small group. And as some of the surviving members had told me that I had interviewed, we realized very quickly we were just all talking to each other. We weren't really talking to the public. And the public really wasn't listening at the time. And there was really nothing they could do about it because landmarks preservation had not been passed yet. It will be passed in, well, from this photo, 3 years from when this photo was taken. So in 1963, the Lipsick Company rolls on up and they begin to demolish the station in late October of 1963. The first thing they do is ceremoniously take down the 24 eagles over all the facades. The eagles are not dumped. They are passed all along the country, and we're still finding eagles all over the place. We're still finding statuary that made it from Penn all around. And Norman McGrath has a really great anecdote. He says, Justin, they started with the outside, and it was huge, and it was granite. And for a year and a half, it looked like the station wasn't going anywhere. And then he said, you get inside, and it's all faux. It's all steel, and it's all plaster, and that went down within months. So it just seemed like his direct quote was, I always love it. He said, the station refused to yield, but then eventually, of course, it did. And these were the carriageways or the taxiways that were built into the building on the sides, 31st and 33rd Street. These, again, were not outdoor spaces. They were spaces built into the building. Very impressive structures, which you could turn from 7th Avenue, either from 33rd Street or into a 31st Street garage, and they would, or carriageway, and you would have access to the concourse from there. And this is probably, and again, these are all Norman McGrath's color photos, by the way, who Norman, I actually just talked to Norman a couple weeks ago, who is still active and well, which is so great to hear because Norman is a really, not only an excellent architectural photographer, his work has been featured in Architectural Digest, in the New York Times. He is just a really lovely human being as well. This is the end of the end, basically. This is all you've got left of Penn, and this is probably 1965-ish, mid-1965. And as you see, the 7th Avenue facade in the front of this photo is coming down as they are completing the superstructure of Madison Square Garden behind it. The 7th Avenue facade was left up intentionally till the very end as sort of the, this is what we're doing. We're getting rid of this old building and we are replacing it with a new office building, a completely redeveloped train station, and the sports arena complex, which many people were obviously excited about. And this was an old New Yorker cartoon about the remnants of Penn Station, mainly the facade, being trucked up and dumped right across the river in the Meadowlands. And where do you want Penn Station? And of course, Penn Station was literally dumped right on, and this is an iconic 1965 New York Times photo. You can see the train is going into or out of Penn. I'm not sure what direction. I sort of envision it going in to Penn through the North River Tunnel. So once you get right out of the North River Tunnel, you look to the left, there's still an open marshy field with a trucking depot in the fore. Most of this facade work got ground down to become landfill for the trucking depot, which was not there in the 60s when this was dumped. Now, of course, you see this is an Adolf Weinman sculpted quarter of a day and night clock. And there were 4 of these clocks, and a whole clock set actually made its way to Kansas City. It was part of a Boy Scout memorial. And actually, interestingly enough, since the last time I did this talk, Michelle and I spoke to somebody, a historian who prefers to remain anonymous, who is working to try to get the 2 eagles and the full clock set back to Penn in the new Moynihan complex. But it seems like nobody really is paying attention or wants it, both Vernado and who's the other one he reached out to Vernado, they didn't want it, and he reached out to Sohm and they didn't want it. And so who knows? Now, from the transition of demolition, well, what we get is the Penn that we all know and sort of not love at all today, which in the King Arthurian terms, which was the Queen of Air and Darkness, I named this section the Queen of No Air and Darkness because it's never any air down in Penn. I was there for, like I said, about an hour and a half yesterday, and I was almost certain that I was putting my life in danger with COVID, although there were not a lot of people there. It's just very stale down there. And this is my photo. You see people, again, trudging up to the 7th Avenue entrance. This is supposed to be the main entrance. It calls to mind that Vincent Scully quote. I'll go back to it. We used to enter the city like gods, and now we scuttle in like rats. Yes, I agree. And here were the renderings that were published. I believe this was in the New York Times, of what the new redeveloped Pennsylvania Station, all below street level, was going to look like, and the new Madison Square Garden complex on top of it. And like I said, public opinion was great. Arenas, awesome. You've got Elvis, you've got the Beatles, bigger music venues, more room for hockey. The NHL wanted to get out of 50th Street and 8th Avenue into something a little bit roomier. So people were, quite excited about this. And of course, you talk to people today, and I've talked to many people who say, well, I have very formative, wonderful memories of Madison Square Garden. I don't want to see it go. So of course, a lot of us look at it and go, it's an ugly mass of whatever, but a lot of people do have great associations with it. It is what it is. And of course, this is what it looks like, or looked like, to walk out onto 7th Avenue from that same perspective I showed you before, 7th Avenue. You see the Sky Bridge, which connected Gimbel's, which is today the Manhattan Mall, to Saks, which Gimbel's was the parent company of Saks Fifth Avenue. And that Sky Bridge is still there today. Those buildings are still there today. The Manhattan Mall is the old Gimbel's. And right behind the Hotel Pennsylvania. So again, you've got the station that comes into this complex of very impressive buildings. And I always like to say, look at all that wonderful clearance between the entrance of Penn to 7th Avenue. Unlike today, where if you go back to this, basically that woman is pretty much almost walking out onto the street, taking her life into her hands. There's a taxi stand, and then there's a bunch of guys trying to sell you umbrellas or Liberty Island tickets, or double-decker bus tickets, and then you're ejected out into 7th Avenue. There's really nothing else. But here you had plenty of room. It was a lot safer. You could see there's a whole sidewalk full of people right in front of you. And then this was a Norman photo from right after they opened the redeveloped Penn in 1960. This is probably 67. And you can see here now everybody sort of doing their scuttling in like rats bit right after the demolition of Penn. You can see the Gimbel sign right there. And oh, Morbo, you're here. Little Nick's. I remember the last time you said, oh, I know that everybody's supposed to be groaning at this picture, but I was happy to see Little Nick's Pizza. Well, here it is again. Norman McGrath photo of, Norman spent, he was a structural engineer working on the 16th floor of the Hotel Pennsylvania. So he was watching this on a daily basis happen before his eyes. And he lived, I believe he said he lived on 30th or 31st Street at the time. So he was also a neighborhoody. And he just couldn't get over the dichotomy of the new station, which clearly made people very cramped and unhappy, as you could see this woman kind of just pouting and looking in the other direction. And but you will notice there are benches still down there. Those will disappear soon because no benches in Penn, unless you go into the Amtrak waiting area. And then here's downstairs. So this is the LIRR concourse, very different from what it looks like today. But as you can see, Penn becomes the very cramped subterranean sort of warren that it is today. This is the main rotunda area, which is still there in some form today. This was supposed to replace the main waiting room, the Roman Baths of Caracalla. And where these people are coming from behind the escalator, if you don't know, there was like a taxiway or carport area behind them. And I remember talking to an Amtrak press rep who said that, you know, all of the files from the time were just so impressed with themselves that they built this taxiway in between Madison Square Garden, the office space, and Penn, and they were just thrilled that cars were going to be able to just drive right up and drop people off either way. And of course, they never used it, and it's been closed off to vehicular traffic for many years now for security reasons, but it's such a waste. And ticketing, this is for the Pennsylvania Railroad at the time, was right at the bottom of the escalator. Now this is the entryway into the Amtrak waiting room. But this is, I know it's a very low quality photo, but I included it because I don't think people realized or remember as well, but you may remember how just dark and ugly the brown brick of Penn was. All over Penn was this really ugly, crappy brown brick that really brought the whole color palette down even lower than it could be without any natural light. And then when Amtrak comes to be in the early 80s, replacing the void that the Penn Central leaves behind after going bankrupt, because you have to realize Pennsylvania Railroad went bankrupt anyway, and that's why they were selling the air rights to Madison Square Garden. New York Central goes bankrupt. They try to merge together to save each other, and they go bankrupt as an entity. And so the idea is, well, now the federal government has to come in and nationalize the rail, because what are we going to do with all this rail network that used to be private and is no longer? And they also use ticketing right at the bottom of the base of the escalators in the rotunda. That's moved back later on. And here is downstairs at the LIRR concourse again, more brown brick, terrazzo everywhere, very crowded. You see those fans mounted there. The big promise was air conditioning. We're going to air condition this new Penn Station. And I don't know, have you been to Penn in July? Not really. And if it's there, it doesn't work. NJ Transit brings in these huge portable units and hooks them up to vents, and they smell like sewage. It's really gross. And I love this because I was on a Wired New York chat when I was putting this talk together a couple of years ago. And this user said, yes, that's the one. Public school cafeteria feel. Can't believe the whole station was covered in this. And yes, this is the only spot where that original brick is. It's right when you get at the bottom of the 7th Avenue escalators. As you're walking down towards Amtrak, that's the only spot where this brick still exists. And I always like to include this because there was something very simple about this that made me realize that I wanted to keep doing this with Penn. I got this letter from a Kickstarter, or this email from a Kickstarter supporter who said, I'm 38 years old, so I never got to enjoy the old Penn Station either. I use the, in quotes, new one pretty frequently, and it's an insult to humanity. I hope I get to see your play. And actually, he did get to see the play. And it's funny because, you know, Penn has a very bad rap for many good reasons. But as I was saying to the host of the podcast yesterday, as we were walking around, you know, it was a necessity for them to make Penn the way it was, because it was a demolition site and a construction site for 3.5 years. And you couldn't disturb one day of transit in doing both of those processes. So that's why everything's slapdash. And for me, that's the gold mine for all of the remnants, because they couldn't change anything. in the lower levels of the station. It had to stay all the way it was. So, you know, you go down a track level and you look up and that superstructure or that infrastructure down there is from 1910. And there's the play again. That's a great shot. I know exactly what he's doing there. He is humming Tannhäuser, the overture to Tannhäuser, which he uses as a musical metaphor for Penn. Because I am a Wagner fan and a cheeseball. Oh, I forgot I put this in. So this is the beginning. Oh, let me pause this. Hold on. I forgot I had put this in. This is the very beginning of the show for those of you who did not see it when we did the Insider event premiere for YouTube. And I can, if anybody wants it again, you can, it's in the archives of our digital archives. But I like to, I forgot I wanted to show the beginning because you'll notice what happens here is they start, this was the opening sequence of the show. And the whole thing was a projectionable canvas. Because, you know, when I wrote the show, it was 7 different locations in a demolished train station that was one of the biggest train station in the world. How do you recreate these pieces? So I had just originally said, use the photos. That was the whole point. Use the photo documentation that was done. And this creative team, which came on, which is a Broadway level creative team. And I did not have a Broadway level budget, by the way. They liked the work so much that they did it almost basically at a donation. I did pay them, but not what they were worth. They created this amazing set, and you can see how time goes by here. They black out the ceiling, which they did during World War II, the concourse, and then it goes sort of from the past to the present of that moment, 1963. You'll notice the clock flying. But the other thing is, listen to the sounds. We had this brilliant sound designer who also wrote the music, who went to Grand Central Terminal, and he recorded hours of people walking around Grand Central in between the announcements. And he created that as a sound palette for the old Penn. It was really quite beautiful, but. Oh, it's a little wonky and slow. Sorry. There we go. And the play goes on. I don't know if you also heard, now that I told you, a couple of opening piano bars to Tannhäuser, and he was hanging up Agbany signs at the beginning of that. And again, if you haven't seen it, it's in the digital archives, or you can email me. I can give you a link to the whole thing. It's a fairly good quality recording. But so that ran from November to mid-December in 2015, and then January 2016. I wake up and I get a whole bunch of my phones just blowing up because Cuomo announces that he's doing the Empire Station complex to improve Penn and push Farrelly along. And a lot of people thought, "Oh my God, look at what the look at what the play did." And I was like, "No, this was all in the plans." I'm not sure anybody from the Cuomo team saw the play, but it was nice to think maybe, hey, but not the case. But he did announce right after that Farrelly was going ahead. Also, high nerdery happening right now. This was a new rendering that Cuomo's office put out talking about, again, we're leaving Madison Square Garden where it is, and we're creating this thing. They kept using the term Empire Station Complex. And a lot of nerds like myself, you see the color scheme here. You've got red, you've got white, you've got this dark black. And of course, I was like, oh, you mean like the Galactic Empire in Star Wars? And there was a lot of Twitterversing going around about the Empire Station Complex and Star Wars, and it was funny. And so they actually did dial back on calling this the Empire Station Complex. It's not front and center anymore. They're just continually referring to it as Moynihan. But technically, the whole thing, Penn, Moynihan, a couple of the other projects surrounding Penn, are still considered to be known as the Empire Station Complex. Now, the ill-made future was about 2013. Madison Square Garden actually is surprised to find out that its operating permit is only good for 10 years. They thought they were going to get it in perpetuity again, but they didn't. It was a mayoral race year, and I think it was Christine Quinn who fought very hard to limit Madison Square Garden to try to get it off the back of Penn. And so immediately a contest was held. It wasn't anything real, but hey, reimagine Penn Station. And of course, some of the biggest architecture firms in the world weighed in. This is a shop rendering here of what could happen if we got rid of Madison Square Garden and redeveloped Penn. But first, in the mid-90s, there's Governor Pataki with Bill Clinton, and of course, Senator Moynihan, whose brainchild was, let's use the Farrelly Post Office across the street to redevelop Penn Station to make it something that we can be proud of as New Yorkers and not ashamed of like it is today. The reason why is Moynihan was a shoeshine boy in Penn, the old Penn, and he loved it quite a bit. And these were the original renderings, very different from the original 90s, late 90s ideas that came across, but I'm showing them to you anyway. As you can see, the ceilings were reimagined differently. This is more sort of a wave here in the courtyard. But the same integrity of the design followed through. But then these were some of the more fanciful 2013 entries that were put in. You can see here a lot of these look a lot more like science fiction than they do reality. The idea of sort of an inverse building in a park around a dome. And then of course that inverted building is tiered park space. Really interesting, but this one, I know I've made this joke before, but I keep saying, you think Penn is confusing now? Wow. I would spend hours trying to get out of this. This was this was shops, and it was one of my favorite. I really thought that this one really sort of lent itself to, again, that height and that air that the old Penn had to it. And of course, the open nature of it, which would make Penn a lot more accessible. And Shop also said, well, let's move Madison Square Garden a little further west. Now, this was pre-Hudson Yards. Hudson Yards was just a twinkle in the eye at the moment, but the idea was put Madison Square Garden over in the Hudson Yards area. This was also a good one. I forgot if this was Somme or not. But this also large, high, open, that was the idea. Let's bring light, let's bring space, let's bring an ease of passenger navigation to it. And then from all of this, about 2 years later, we hosted a Penn Summit with the Transit Museum and Cooper Union. We did a Penn history program with the Transit Museum, and then a week later, we did a Future of Penn Summit in the Great Hall of Cooper Union, which Michelle and I were absolutely petrified. We talked to Cooper Union and we said, please, 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 give us the smaller space. We don't want the Great Hall. Abraham Lincoln could fill the Great Hall, but we didn't think we could. And there wasn't a seat left in the house. It was over 900, and I believe 88 people showed up, which was really humbling and scary. And here is the picture of the North River Tunnel. And again, this is what the North River Tunnel looks like today. And the main topic of this summit at the time was, well, guys, the bigger problem, Penn is very uncomfortable. It's not built to handle the hundreds of thousands of people who go through it a day. But the real problem is going to become when this 100 and almost 20-year-old tunnel is rendered inoperable. And Sandy brought that almost to reality in 2012. And when one of those tunnels go down, we have a very big problem. So of course there is the Gateway project. A Gateway proposes that they would build a new tunnel under the Hudson, which would hook up to back over into Jersey to alleviate that traffic and also serve as a backup in case something happened to the existing tunnel. Gateway is in differing forms of completion and funding, and Governor Chris Christie said absolutely not. New Jersey's not footing the bill for this. Very short-sighted way to look at it, if you ask me. He's still getting a lot of flack from that today, but hopefully someday it's going to become a reality. And of course, what is a reality, weeks away, some say possibly 3, okay, is Moynihan. And by coming soon, I mean very soon. And this was an updated there's always updated renderings, but not much changes. This was the last set of Moynihan renderings, which came out late over the summer. As you can see, there is the actual Hudson Yards on the west side of it. And the idea is it's happening. This is an old picture Michelle took of a fashion show at Skylight, which was in the center of the Farrelly Post Office, which was then chased out so that they can turn this space into the main train hall. And the idea is that main train hall in the courtyard of the Farrelly Post Office would have, as you see, that sort of 4-arched glass ceiling, which is an homage to the glass ceiling of the other concourse of the old Penn Station, and multi-levels of retail and restaurant space, but 145,000 square feet of concourse space for commuters and travelers who are using mainly the LIRR and mainly Amtrak. New Jersey Transit trains tend to favor the 1 to 4 tracks at times, and 1 to 4 are not serviceable from this location. You've got to go back over to Penn. So they say that there's going to be a passageway, but that'll be tough. And there's another rendering of it. And here is the new LIRR ticketing area. One of the things you may notice if you've been to Penn recently is that the old LIRR ticketing area, which was there since the station opened in 1910, is gone. They wiped it off the face of the LIRR. They replaced it with a much smaller temporary one down the hallway a little bit, because what they want to do is but they will put a new ticketing area down over in Penn, but they do want people to start doing LIRR ticketing over here because it's nicer. And there's the Amtrak area. Rumor was a couple months ago, it was like a month or 2 months ago, an article came out that the Amtrak said we are massively behind schedule and we are not going to be ready for the opening of Moynihan. But since it's only a quarter of the space, Cuomo said, well, that's okay because the MTA is ready. And he said it will open on time. I have not heard anything from anybody from our press contacts to the contrary that it will not that it will open in the beginning of January. And of course, lots of restaurant space. Pre-pandemic, we obviously thought, oh, great, okay, well, lots of restaurant space, lots of shopping. You got Hudson Yards right across, also lots of restaurant space, lots of shopping. Do we need more shopping and restaurant space? Well, we'll see what happens, but it's going to be there. And again, just different angles. The idea is, for those of you who don't know, it's the same tracks. Those tracks have been there since 1910, and they're just being utilized in a different way. The same tracks that go out the backside of the Hudson Yards. So they're just using them in a different manner. These tracks used to service the post office before those trains would go into Penn, or they would go off to the post office, they would drop off the mail and go right back out. This is an older rendering of what the ceiling was going to be. This is them actually utilizing the McKimmey and White supports where they would be building in between those glass ceilings. This was, I believe, 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, this shot. And there they are building it. I used to show these on my Penn tour, as proof that it was reality, that Moynihan was happening, because you can't see it from street level. So, I'd tell them and I'd go, yes, it's been approved and yes, it's happening. And I would show them these pictures and of course these pictures as well, but this is all done. And I think my next shot will be me on the edge. No, it's not. It's this guy. I love this shot. This guy in the summer, putting together the windows and of course that umbrella so he doesn't burn to death. There it is. Okay. So I'm not showing this to you because I want you to see me and our guide Jillian at the edge, which is the Hudson Yards platform. This literally is the edge of the edge. This was the day before the pandemic shut down the city. This was March 12th, I believe it was. But the reason why I'm including this is if you look right behind Jillian where my cursor is, that is Moynihan completed. You'll see ceiling done, the atrium way ceiling done. So you knew things were going along. And of course, Coda, Jillian had COVID in this picture, which I found out later. Thankfully, I did not. She recovered. She's doing very well, but she had a rough go of it a couple weeks later. And there is a close-up of the completed windows. I went up to the edge a couple of weeks ago when we were bringing people up, and I wanted to get a shot of the new entryway on 33rd, but I couldn't see it. But I got it from somewhere else. And Michelle took this photo in June. They continued to do work on Moynihan through the pandemic. Again, Cuomo's initiative was we will open by hook or by crook in January. For those of you, I don't usually talk about this on this talk, but the podcast that I was on yesterday, the host was fascinated by the quote above the colonnade of this McKim and White building, the post office, neither snow nor rain nor sleet nor gloom stays these couriers from the swift completion of their daily rounds. Wow, I have memorized. That is, everybody thinks it is the motto of the post office. Well, the post office borrowed it, but it is actually the ancient Greek writer Herodotus, who was admiring the Persian courier system for the Persian army. And the post office, when the building opened in, I believe it was 1913, took a look at that and said, oh, hey, that's pretty cool. We should make it our motto. I'm sure it's slightly more complicated than that, but who knows? And then, of course, these renderings were put out right as Facebook announced that it was going to take over most of the office space in the Farrelly complex. This is what some of the roof and outdoor areas will look like of Farrelly. Some of it will be public, some of it will be private to Facebook's offices. But Facebook has taken, I forgot what the exact square footage amount is, but quite a bit. They will be the anchor tenant. And in the middle of the pandemic, they said, nope, we're coming in. We're not abandoning this. We, unlike Neiman Marcus and Hudson Yards, we're coming. And again, here's the 9th Avenue view looking towards Madison Square Garden. And then how do you solve a problem like Penn Station? Not Maria. Penn Station goes fairly unchanged as Moynihan opens. You'll still have Penn Station. This was an old Cuomo rendering from 2016, showing an idea of taking out the theater under Madison Square Garden and creating this new, more open and airy 8th Avenue entryway into Penn. They have, I'm pretty sure they've abandoned this at the moment, but there were a lot of ideas that were vying for attention to redevelop Penn. This is the one that won a lot of hearts, including the New York Times and Michael Kilman. Vishaan Chakrapriti came up with the idea, inspired by the New York State Pavilion out in Flushing Meadow, of taking the superstructure of Madison Square Garden, glassing it over, creating a large suspension roof with a map of New York on it, which again is an homage, an opposite homage to the Pavilion in Flushing. And they wanted to do a lot of open air here too. The idea was to utilize the existing structure, but also make it a lot airier by actually having open air entryway. So it's more like almost like a cell wall. It's sort of semi-permeable, which I kept saying, oh, kind of a neat idea, but have they experienced winter in New York. My assumption is that they would probably put up temporary doorways during the winter to keep the frigid January and February out. But the idea is open it up again, as you could see looking out over to Farley across the street, making it one center platform with all of the escalators and stairs leading down to track level, accessible from one area. What I loved about these is the idea is to leave the remnant 1910 staircases right where they are. And there are those porous design, as they call it, which beautiful in the summer, probably, maybe. I don't know, because then air conditioning probably wouldn't work too well either, huh? And there's a cross section of it, and how this is how it would figure in to Moynihan across the street, the same way Penn figures in today. And then there was the idea from the Civic Arts Society down in DC to rebuild Penn Station brick by brick. There were a couple of big architects, Richard Cameron was one of them, who put his name behind it and said this is the most cost-effective option because the plans are already done. And you know, there was a precedent for doing this because of rebuilt buildings in Europe after World War II. And sentimentalists love this idea. You could see here they open up the wall spaces for retail and for restaurant space, to make the space pay for itself, or at least try. They also plan to use the carriageways. I don't think I have a rendering of it, but to use the carriageways as open park space or outdoor space. And you can see these renderings were taken literally right from, I even know the photos they took them from, direct photos of the old Penn, and then sort of computer generated the escalators and the new Acela trains and the boards, the digital boards, and the people looking up and going, oh wow, look at all that light. Oh, I did put it, oh, look at that, I forgot. Here's what, instead of using it as a driveway for cabs and cars, they wanted to use it as areas for outdoor retail and seating, cafes, walking, parks. And their big thing was, well, you know, you could fit 3 Grand Centrals in one Penn. That's a very complicated thing to say because Grand Central, again, as a lot of you know, if you've been on my tour, has a massive basement that goes up to 60th Street. So technically, no, not really. But the idea was, you know, Grand Central could fit in this grand building 3 times, and that's why we need to rebuild Penn. And here's an artful aerial view. And then Cuomo 2 years ago put out this, we are redoing the LIRR concourse. So whatever your plans were, guys, it doesn't matter. We're doing our own thing. The MTA is refitting the LIRR again. They had refit the LIRR in the mid 90s to sort of upgrade it from its late 70s and 80s tragedy. And one of the big projects were to resurface LIRR, which you're seeing here is a rendering. And you may know Sushi Bento is actually right where Sushi Bento is. So this is the passageway leading down to the ACE between the 1, 2, 3. And again, to sort of brighten it up, but not really change the height of the spaces or anything. And this guy, so it was to provide a new entryway down into the LIRR concourse from 33rd and the corner of 7th. So that is happening. And I think, I can't say this for sure, but I'm pretty sure this is a little bit of a homage to Vishant Chakrabarti and his map on the ceiling. They put a map on the ceiling of this escalator leading out to 33rd Street. Which in the renderings, I said, oh, I wonder if that's just like a joke or they're really doing it. But this is my picture from yesterday. You can see, this is all I got. This is all I could see. They still haven't opened anything up, but you can see the map is on the ceiling of the new entry and exit way out of 33rd. It's there. This is fresh off the press from yesterday afternoon. And this is also fresh off the press from yesterday afternoon. I took this picture of the new entryway. The idea is this will open with Moynihan. So a couple weeks. I did see a little bit of the escalators peeking through yesterday, so escalators are in. And Vornado has put out a very lengthy prospectus about the Penn District, which all of the blue buildings here are under Vornado control. And you can see what they're trying to do is sell you office space or retail space in the new Penn District. And here are the renderings for what they want to do with the 7th Avenue facade of 2 Penn, which is their plans are to completely reface 2 Penn Plaza, get rid of the old, where my cursor is, that old awning, replace it with something that looks a little bit more artful, I guess, and then put this upper level on stilts almost. It looks like stilt supports, which you'll see if you go back, there's one hanging out right there as sort of the first one. It's been there for a while. It's been there for almost a year now, I think. They've put that there as sort of a, this is all gonna happen right here. Go from 33rd to 31st. Create new office space, bright, airy, open airspace on top of that. Here's a side view. And you can see that there's Hotel Pennsylvania, but you can also see there is the MTA entrance to the LIRR. When you talk to Amtrak, Amtrak loved the fact that they had the first Starbucks counter in the world that was dual-sided. So this Starbucks, and I got a coffee from it yesterday, has a counter which faces out to the public and then a counter which faces into the Amtrak waiting room. And it is the first of its kind. Go Amtrak. So we'll wrap this up with really what the tour is when you come to see the tour, which is the remnants of Penn Station. But of course, I do talk about all of this on the tour in some form, probably not in this type of depth if you've been on it. But I've had to move the starting location a couple of times because of the new construction. So this is where I'm introducing the tour from the broken down column frieze in the entryway from 34th over to LIRR downstairs. And the remnants, the highlight of the remnants are this gate. So this gate was part of the old gateway into the LIRR waiting room from 1910 until this was walled up during the demolition and then restored in the mid-90s when the MTA came down and redid the concourse then. It's a really beautiful piece. Also, you see where that arrow is pointing in this picture to that gate. So the concourse system of Penn was dual layered or leveled. So if you were coming into New York to Penn Station, you'd go up the shorter set of stairs to the mid-level here. If you were departing New York, you would go down the longer set of stairs directly to track level. And the question I would get on the tour all the time is, Justin, how would they know which one to use? What stops people from going right up that one? Well, nothing really, except that they had a very, very elegant high-tech solution. They created these gates to hang exit signs off of. So you knew, if you were leaving your train, you'd go up this set of stairs. And there's the last of those gates. There were whole networks of them, but by track 13 and 14, this is the last of the remnant 1910 exit gates. And you can see that little spit right at the top. They would put, I don't know if you could see it in that photo. No, you can't. They'd put a little globe light on it. Because of course at night, it was very dark in Penn because Penn was mainly driven by daylight. This is one of my favorites. The old hand-painted sign right by the 123 to the Hilton Passageway leading, saying Pennsylvania Railroad trains are to the right. So if you were coming off the IRT trains, which are the 123 today, you'd hang a right, go all the way down to the end of the Hilton Passageway, and that's where you could connect to the Pennsylvania Railroad trains. And this is the last of the signs. The MTA put that light up, so they blocked the top, unfortunately. I have been trying to get the Transit Museum or somebody at the MTA to take the light up and plexiglass this over with a nice little plaque over it. And I keep getting that, yeah, that's a good idea. Oh, you're so cute, kind of thing. But I don't know why. It's really low hanging fruit. It's not that expensive, but it's a piece of history. I love this photo. I found this photo recently. It was a son coming home from war, being greeted by his mother downstairs on the arrivals level of Penn. And I always like to tell people, you know, I've spent all this time telling you just how high the Penn ceilings were. But when you came into Penn, the ceilings were low, like they are today, because, hey, guess what? That ceiling is still there today. It's right there. And so this is one of the highlights of the tour after I've gone on and sort of talked about the layout of the station. And we get to this point where I go, yeah, it's all still here because they couldn't move the lower levels during the demolition and the construction in the 60s. What they did is they just terrazzoed over those glass block floors that everybody was standing on the upper level of the concourse. And this, you see by the Hamilton sign, so you know how old this is. This terrazzo patch right here also has glass block flooring, which brought the sun from the sky directly down to track level. Let's see if you could see that back here. Kind of. These floors were also glass block to a certain degree to let light down. And there's a close-up artful-ish photo of the glass block 1910 floors. So there is that passage is close to the AC, which everybody thinks is just the low-hanging LIRR ceilinged waiting area. Well, actually, it was the original Penn arrivals level under what basically where Amtrak would be above. And so I did this. Actually, Aaron did this for me. Thank you, Aaron. Superimposed the picture of what it looked like in 1910 when the station opened and what it looks like today. You see these pillars here. These pillars are still under this aluminum covering. And the glass block ceiling is still above everybody's head above this drop ceiling. It's still there. It's all there. Elevator shafts, not there. And I did the same thing upstairs. You see it's 12 and 11. This, you can see troops waiting for their deployments here. And this is what you would be looking at today. Same area, same track, except we have Madison Square Garden on our head today, and they did not then. And here is the old baggage and parcel storage office back by the 123. You can see those are all McKim-Mead and White 1910 railings. And of course, at the top of the stairs, which caused a little bit of a stir last December, was the revelation of turning the lights on at the top of the stairs and seeing the old passage, the IRT passageway from Pennsylvania Railroad concourse to the 1, 2, and 3, or the IRT. And what do we see embedded in those ceilings but Guastavino arches, a vaulted Guastavino ceiling. And I sort of nicknamed this Penn's Whisper Gallery, and that took off like lightning, which was really cool. And I went on a couple of news shows to show people this. And we tried to let Amtrak let us get in, and Amtrak said, absolutely not. The lights have been off for years. It was closed up in the 1980s. They stopped letting people through. As a matter of fact, this cinder block wall in the front is actually right behind the clock mural at the end of the LIRR passageway, if you know the area well. The reason why the lights are back on, they are trying to figure out if this passageway will be viable to give riders access from the 123 back to Penn at some point. This is an Amtrak initiative. It's not an MTA initiative, which means that Guastavino was contracted by McKim-Mead and White for Penn, but he was also contracted by the IRT for the subway. And so I asked when they were doing this last year, I talked to Jason Abrams at Amtrak, and I said, whose is this? Is it MTA's or is it yours? Because that's MTA signage, as you see right there. And he said, no, that's actually Amtrak's. And I said, all right, well, then that was a Guastavino contract from McKim-Mead and White, because Guastavino was all over Penn. Really, really cool. And I hope someday we can actually walk into it. And that's the top perspective. You can see those old railings. They're hanging on for dear life, but they are great artifacts. And I end with this last, again, like I began with the Diana Hel Hadid, I'm going to end with the Diana Hel Hadid, which is put right by the turnstiles of the 123. New art put up about 1.5 years ago. And this is called the Arches of Old Penn Station. And you have to really stand as far back as you can to see that this is, again, sort of like pulling through a faded memory of the arches of the concourse. And I don't know, I think Nicole got this picture. I don't know how she did it because it's in a really bad spot to stand back. They put it on sort of a diagonal with an elevator right behind it. And it's really hard to get a full uh, perspective of this, but it's absolutely beautiful. And again, it's just like Gradova and sort of the obsession of what Penn was. This is kind of the memory also that we conjure up of what Penn was. And it's what I do. I still do it. I will probably be doing it until I leave the planet. Because I think of all of the things, you know, the MAS, the president of the MAS said once, you know, your play was a cautionary tale. I'm like, yeah, yeah, people understand the value of architecture and the value of history. But what I like to call attention to is just how fascinating Penn will always be. It doesn't matter what the space is. It doesn't matter if it's the Penn we hate today or a new Penn or a Penn back then. It's one of the most unique urban designs because of the mishmash of history and development that goes on around it. So it's why I do what I do. I thank you for joining me. I know we had a lot of repeat guests tonight, but let me see. I'll leave it on here and let's go to the chat if there were any questions. Robert Moorbeck, huzzah. I know that's about Little Nick's Pizza. Are we looking at 7th Avenue? Jeffrey Bernard, most likely. Oh, I said I answered it. Reminds me of the Port Authority, not a pleasant thought, very enjoyable. Oh, Jeffrey, see you later. March 11th is when you did the first tour, but you did not go. Oh, you're right. So that was, Robin, that was March 12th. That's a good memory. That was literally the last day. And Robert Moorbeck, the virtual tour is always a thrill, especially Little Nick's. Thanks. Well, I will say for those of you who are still here with me that the next time I do it, again, we're putting this one on again in January because I'm hoping to have a lot more of the actual Moynihan represented. It'll probably tip a little bit more to Moynihan because by then I will actually have gone in, hopefully, if all goes according to plan. And of course, a lot of you guys probably will not for a while because of the pandemic. I mean, you can, it will be open to the public, but you might not want to venture out that way. So if there are no further questions, I will leave you to your evenings or late afternoons, depending on where you are joining me from today. Stay warm if it's cold, because I'm still cold in New York. Oh, thank you, Jane. Good to see you. Tomorrow, by the way, I am going to be live streaming from Dyckman Farmhouse. Dyckman is putting up a whole bunch of new art, which is inspired from the slave culture at Dyckman and the awareness of the slave culture there. Very exciting because the executive director will be walking us around in person and I will be filming her. So that's at noon tomorrow Eastern Standard Time. So please join me then for that. I'm excited about that. And then Friday, insider and tour guide Richard Soden will be doing a transformation of the Lower East Side. And it's quite shameful that we haven't done anything Lower East Side centric yet during the pandemic, but it's a really good presentation. I've seen a little bit of the preview, and Richard Soden, who does volunteering work with Eldred Street Synagogue, will be leading us. We're in good hands. So have a good night, everybody. Please stay safe and well, and hopefully I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Bye.